Morning, Bobby.
Nice to meet you, Mike. I'm David Evans. I just met Bob a minute ago. Some CJ Carter. So, anyway, I am an advocate for preacher training school and I'm visiting churches in this area. I think they're good for students. And if you could point me in the person's direction that you might like to mission. I'll be right back. Kevin Red. Kevin. His father is Midtown Church of Christ. He's the preacher there, been there for a long time. Okay. He's a black fellow. He's done a great job. We're working with him right now.
Good to have David Abels with us today. He is promoting the India Preachers Training School in how you pronounce that, David? Kakinada, India. And we're glad to have him with us today. And he's going to lead us in our open prayer. Amen. Thank you, David. Good to have you with us. Looking at Romans chapter 14, we say correctly, speak where the Bible speaks, and be silent where the Bible is silent. Speaking where the Bible speaks means listening to the will of God, whether it's something he requires and commands or something he prohibits. To be silent where the Bible is silent is to not speak where he is not spoken, not to put requirements or commands on people that are not a part of the law of God, or not encouraging people to do what God prohibits. We know that we are under law. 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 21 tells us that, and Paul's saying that he was under the law of Christ. We're not under the law of Christ as a basis or foundation for our salvation, but we are under law as a rule of conduct, telling us how we should live as those of us who are in Christ and saved by his grace. the kind of life to live that will honor God, but also keep us within the confines of God's grace. Now, up to this point, from chapter 12, verse 1, through the closing verse of chapter 13, we have looked at things that are absolutes. These are non-negotiable. They're things that we don't have a right to decide whether they are right or wrong. Our only choice is to decide if we will obey or disobey. But when we get to chapter 14, he's going to be talking about things that are matters of opinion, matters of personal judgment. He's going to show us that the weak within the congregation, and incidentally, they're given the freedom to decide what their opinion will be, and whichever way they go, they have God's approval. For the simple reason that he wants each person to follow his or her conscience. The one who is weak tries to put too much under the category of law that's really in the area of opinion. And the weak are being told not to judge the ones who are strong. The Amplified Bible says not to criticize or to pass judgment on the one who can eat. The strong understand, they're more mature in the faith. They understand better what should be under law and what should be under opinion. Some other texts that we're going to look at. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 8. The issue, there's several texts that are relevant to this particular issue of the area of opinion or personal judgment. But it's really a matter of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is understanding and applying the Word and the will of God. And there are several issues that would make the weak better understand that what they don't feel is right is acceptable to God. That is a distinction between the covenants, the implications of Bible silence, right inferences from general principles, and understanding the difference between eternal principles and the application of those principles in a given culture. Again, the strong correctly understand that there are going to be three things he's going to address: eating meat sacrificed to idols. He's going to talk about observing special days, and then drinking wine. All that he places within the category of opinion. Let's read some other texts that are relevant to the chapter. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 8 in verse 1. Now, concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. If anyone loves God, he's known by God. And then he gets into the matter of eating food sacrificed to idols. Therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, that there is one God but one. And this is apparently the problem with some of those who were in the category of the weak, in that they thought that by eating meat sacrificed to idols, they were supporting idolatry. Because Paul says that, the idol is nothing. There's only one true God. They're certainly not God. But in their thinking, by eating that meat, the way it would function, the priest would take the sacrifices, the meat that was sacrificed, and he would keep some for himself, but the rest of it he would take to the market to generate revenue. And we're going to see that there were even pagans also, but especially the Jewish believers who were convinced that if they bought and ate that meat, they were supporting idolatry. For although there may be many so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God and Father, from whom all things, for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. However, not all possess this knowledge, talking about the weak, but some, through former association with idols, and it shows that there were some among even the Gentile converts who had qualms of conscience about eating food sacrificed to idols. Eat food that's really offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. Food will not commend us to God, for we are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. When it talks about a stumbling block to the weak, he's talking about causing them to sin. Sin by eating food sacrificed to idols, and in that process, they believe that they are supporting idolatry. Where if someone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged, if his conscience is weak, to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. And that's the real issue, understanding that the weak need to be, their opinion should be respected, their integrity respected, even though they are wrong in their thinking. If they were to violate their conscience, then they've sinned against God, as we'll see in another text. If anyone, verse 10, sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, and apparently they had, this may have been the early version of fast food restaurant, will he not be encouraged, if his conscience is weak, to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed. Yes?
Now, I believe technically, this is not a matter of opinion, because the Scripture says it is not allowed to eat food sacrificed to idols. It's that in itself. Isn't that right?
Well, it's a matter of opinion, because the person who is weak, he's of the opinion that he can't eat because he thinks he will be sinning in the process. The strong are of the opinion that, yes, you can, because those idols don't mean anything anyway, but it is a matter of personal judgment and opinion, and we'll see God accepts both. He accepts both the opinion of the weak and the opinion of the strong.
Looks like they just need to be taught. This is okay. But it's okay. They're making this. If it's right, it's okay. Maybe that's not an opinion. This is the fact.
Well, it's the fact that they can eat, but it's not a fact that this weak person can do it. He's of the opinion.
It's his opinion, but it's actually not wrong.
We're going, no, it's
Because it thinks it's wrong.
it's not,
It needs to come with the idea that it is not wrong.
exactly, but before he reaches that point, we're going to see as we get into the text that the strong are not to be arrogant and treat the weak like you're stupid. You know, surely you can see the difference. Putting them down The weak, on the other hand, will be charged not to judge the ones who can eat and say, well, you're not really Christian because you're supporting idolatry. But both views are, the person's given the freedom to choose, the opinion they can eat meat, the opinion they can't. And God gives that freedom, and he approves of both. This doesn't, as we'll say, doesn't eliminate discussions with the weak to try to help them understand, that it's okay. You're not sinning if you eat meat offered to idols. But until that reaches that point, the strong are to respect the opinion of the weak, not put them down, feel like, well, you're just stupid, you don't understand, the truth.
Of course, we shouldn't do that even if they are. That's not my approach to things.
That's exactly what he's saying. When we get into the text, Micah, you're right. That's exactly what he's saying. Don't take that attitude toward the weak. Yes, you have a correct understanding of what's right, but the weak person's not there yet. And it doesn't eliminate discussions to try to help the weak come to see that those idols are, you're not really supporting idolatry, but as long as he thinks he is and eats, then he's sinning. And so he's just trying to promote unity and harmony within the church. Apparently there appears, reading between the lines, that there was some discord between the weak and the strong. And Paul is trying to address that so that they can live together in peace and harmony, each side respecting the other, but at the same time having healthy discussions about the difference.
Those who think that they were strong are turning out to be the weak, because the strong are pushing their opinions so much that in chapter 10 it appears the strong are even bringing in idolatry around the Lord's Supper. So we better be careful when we think we're strong. It could wind up being weak.
Well, the Bible makes a distinction in this context between the strong and the weak. It identifies the strong as being strong as far as their understanding of the fact that, yes, it's okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols. Idols are nothing. And even though you eat that meat, you're not an advocate of idolatry, but the weak think that. So strong as far as their correct understanding, weak as far as their lack of understanding. And what he's trying to do is promote, get the weak, or get the strong, not to look down on the weak, just respect their right to their opinion. At the same time, to get the weak not to be judgmental toward the strong.
Strong have to be careful. If they can be strong on one particular issue, weak on another. They don't have that, doesn't mean just because they're strong on this particular issue, doesn't mean that they have everything figured out.
Well, that's true, but what he's going to be looking at are issues that did create a divide. Eating meat sacrificed to idols, observing special days, and drinking wine. Those are the issues that were the sticking points, the problems as far as the church. And that's why Paul is addressing those, since the attitude of strong needs to be, not to be condescending toward the weak. He doesn't need to be feeling superior because he has that better understanding. The weak, on the other hand, are not to be judgmental and say, well, you're not really a Christian because you eat that meat and you're supporting idolatry.
It's kind of like the weak, strong here, the Christians that weren't Jews before, maybe the weak were the ones that had all these things that they brought. Judaism, that can't do this, can't do that, this way.
We're going to see that not only in the diet, but also observing special days. And he's going to tell them that they have the right to do that, observe special days, as long as they don't try to impose their opinion on everybody else. They need to respect their conscience.
And that's the trick here, is to know this is
Ex-
Everybody has to believe what are the things that should be taken
The Strong had a better grasp of what fits under the category of law and what fits in the category of opinion. The Weak were trying to take things that were matters of opinion and make them law. And he's going to tell them that, each person has a right to their opinion. God gives them that freedom, and he approves of both, he accepts both. But that doesn't mean they're both right. But until that weak person comes to a correct understanding, I'll give you, before I get to that, back in 1624, during the 30 Years' War, a man named Rupertus Meldenius was a German Lutheran preacher. He wrote a tract on Christian unity. It was a time of bloodshed and religious division. And in that tract, he says, in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; in all things, charity. And I think that was adopted by the Restoration Movement, so that we say in matters of faith, unity; in matters of opinion, liberty; in all things, love. But giving people, we're not clones. People say that people are like noses. Everybody's got an opinion, so like they've got a nose. And those opinions aren't always going to coincide. But, the I guess, potential conflict between the strong and weak, Paul is trying to head that off and help them both to have the right attitude in dealing with each other.
I think it's like if Christ is God, you have to believe those are not independent. You either do it like a Catholic or service on Sunday afternoon. That's not an opinion.
Right. Exactly right.
Those are the gospel.
Exactly right. Those all fit under the category of law, but opinion is opinion, and it shouldn't be considered law.
To dovetail on what you were talking about there, Mike, in chapter 8, it clearly says you guys that think you know it and you're strong. He says they need to be showing a loving attitude, even though they may understand something. They have knowledge because knowledge puffs them. So it's the idea of making sure you can wind up being wrong, even though you're right, in the way that you're treating other people.
Well, he hasn't accused them of that yet.
It says that plainly in verses 1 through 3.
He's saying in that text, Bobby, that we need to be knowledgeable, but we need to be knowledgeable with humility.
Exactly, that's what it just said.
And anyway,
I agree.
the strong have the correct understanding, but they need to hold that spiritual maturity with a humble heart. Certainly, we need to be knowledgeable. And we can let knowledge go to our head and think we know more than we know, think that we're smarter than we are. And that's what he's condemning in those opening verses, is that arrogant attitude that I've got all the answers and I know and you don't, and so forth. He goes on to say in verse 11, so by your knowledge this weak person is destroyed. Not only can they be led to sin, but if they persist in that, they could wind up leaving the faith altogether. The brother for whom Christ died, thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, and substitute the word sin there, and you'll have the right idea, makes my brother sin, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. He's saying basically that I'll, rather than standing on my rights, I'll stand on my responsibilities. And my responsibility is to be concerned about the well-being of my fellow Christians. The strong respecting the integrity and conscience of the weak. At the same time, the weak not coming across with a holier-than-thou attitude, and you can't be a Christian if you believe that. Thus, sinning against.
There's an idea to be in Idol's temple, especially if it was Aphrodite, the temple prostitutes over in the next room. I know you said it was fast food. Indeed, it'd be fast food. Otherwise, you might be drawn into something you don't need to get drawn into.
Verse 12, thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it's weak, you sin against Christ. And Paul goes on to say, let's go look at chapter 9 and verse 22. What? Do you not have houses to, I'm sorry, looking at the wrong one. Went too far. Chapter 9 and verse 22. Paul was saying, to the weak, I became weak that I might win the weak. I've become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. Paul was obviously strong, but he didn't make himself weak. He's saying that I try to deal with the weak based on their understanding of what's right and what's wrong. And then going 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. That's elliptical. Obviously saying, don't seek your own good only, but the good of his neighbor.
I think what he says, don't beat them over the head with it. He's willing to be flexible with them on something that's not wrong,
Exactly.
so that he can teach them what's right.
That's exactly right, Mike.
Right before that, not to bring demonic worship to the Lord's Supper, verse 19. What am I saying then? An idol is anything, what is offered to an idol is anything. Rather than the things the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons, not to God. I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot make the Lord's table and the table of demons. Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than He? And I think what's happened is that some of the strong are carrying this too far. And we will see as it develops. I think Paul is trying to work with them and try to bring about unity, but they will end up getting in Paul's face, and it just continues to snowball.
Verse 23, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful or beneficial. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. They don't build up spiritually. If the strong have the wrong attitude toward the weak have the wrong attitude toward the strong. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any questions on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. In Mark 7 and verse 19, Jesus declares all foods to be clean. So the dietary restrictions of the old law obviously did not apply, but we're going to see there were some apparently who felt conscientiously that those did apply, and of course they should respect that until they get to the right understanding. For the earth is the Lord, verse 26, the fullness thereof. For if one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you're disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you and for the sake of his conscience. So apparently, this would apply to Jews also, but apparently, if you read Colossians 2, verses 16 to 23, there were apparently some Gentiles who were against eating meat sacrificed to idols. If someone says to you, verse 28, this has been offered in sacrifice and do not eat it, for the sake of the one who informed you, for the sake of conscience. I don't mean your conscience, but his. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. Let's go back to, with those thoughts, we'll go back to chapter 14 of Romans. And for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. The Jerusalem Bible says, accept him without resorting to an argument. In other words, the strong might accept the weak, but they want to debate the issue and show them how wrong they are. And again, there's nothing wrong with healthy discussions. I'll give you an example we experienced in North Carolina. There was a lady there who, based on 1 Corinthians 11, who believed that she needed to wear a hat to worship because the custom of that day and time about women wearing veils, and she felt like she needed to wear a hat to comply with that. Now, over time, she came to understand that, wearing a hat's not wearing a veil. But in her mind, in her thinking, she was respecting the scriptures. Was she wrong in that understanding? Yes, she was. Eventually, over time, she came to understand that a hat's not a veil and it's not necessary, and she gave it up. But it was her own decision. I've got a loaded question I'm going to ask you. Well, I'll ask it when we get deeper into the text. To welcome him, not just to accept him as a church member, but to welcome him with open arms, with an open heart, accept him in warm affection and fellowship. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. And that's what he's talking about. Viewing with contempt those people who felt like I can only eat vegetables because if I ate meat, I would be supporting idolatry, therefore I'll just eat vegetables only. But the strong are told, don't look at them with contempt, don't despise them, don't think, well, you folks are stupid because you don't correctly understand that, idols nothing, and surely you eat meat. That's why he tells them not to quarrel over opinions, not just to accept them so they can debate them and show them where they're wrong. But not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. But let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. But not the one who eats despise, view with contempt the one who abstains. Let not the one who abstains pass judgment, condemn the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Obviously, when I think the Amplified Bible says, don't criticize and pass judgment on him who eats. So they shouldn't write them off as saying, well, you can't be a real Christian. You're morally lax.
What about James chapter 4, verse 17, when it talks about the person, therefore to him that knoweth the good doeth it not to him that seeth. To me, that's what I think of when we bring up the verse. And those people with greater knowledge realize that life was nothing. So therefore, it's okay. Versus someone that may have come from that background who sees doing that, and how he is Christian, something that's wrong.
Yeah, I think so, David. The right thing to do in this context is for the strong not to despise or view with contempt the weak. The weak, on the other hand, are not to be judgmental toward the strong. Both of them, but you're right, David, doing the right thing is exactly what Paul calls for in chapter 14. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It's before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. He's saying God accepts him, and he has one person to account to, and that's the Lord. And for that reason, he's the Lord's servant, and the Lord can decide whether he accepts him or rejects him. The Lord will decide whether he approves or disapproves.
It sounds like it's saying, do what you want to, just don't cause an uproar about it.
Exactly. And he's trying to promote peace and harmony between the strong and weak, and I think reading between the lines, there appears to have been a problem there. But, it'd be kind of like someone going into a business and starting to criticize the employee. Well, the only one who has the right to criticize the employee is the employer. In the same way, the only one who has the right to criticize, or look down on, or condemn the Christian is the Lord, since they account to him and not to each other. One person esteems one day as better than another, yet another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. This could have been Jewish converts or Gentile God-fearers who still felt like that some of the days, like the Sabbath, for example, should be still respected. And he's saying basically, well, you have the right to do that. Now, what Paul condemns in Acts 15 are those who try to take those Jewish customs and bind them as essentials for salvation. And he's saying that they have every right to do that. Someone defined a Puritan as someone who tries to bind his conscience on everybody else. Well, we should respect our conscience, but not try to bind our conscience on other people. And so there was nothing wrong with them observing, if they wanted to continue to observe the Sabbath day or whatever, as long as they understood it's not a condition for salvation, and that you can do that on your own. Now, getting back to my illustration earlier about the lady wearing the hat because she felt like she had to wear a covering for worship. Should all the other ladies, this is a loaded question, should all the other ladies in the church start wearing hats because she felt like David shaking and laughing, but he's right. She had the right to feel that way, but she didn't have the right to expect everybody else to respect her conscience. Should she have worn the hat? Yes, by all means, until she came to understand that no, a hat's not really a veil, and that was a custom that was true in their day and time, but not true of our culture today. So if they wanted to esteem one day better than another esteems all days alike. We should understand that every day belongs to God. Every day should be devoted to the service of God. And not that the days are secular, because they are God-given, and God should be honored through those days. Now, another loaded question, what about the Lord's Day, first day of the week? Basically, that fits under law. That's not opinion. You have the Apostle Paul in Acts 20 and verse 7, 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 2. You have the precedent of an apostle that makes that a matter of law. It's not a matter of opinion. So that didn't fit under the category of considering every day alike because they all should be devoted to God's service. Oh, Acts 20 and verse 7. Take a quick look at it. This is the Apostle Paul. And remember, the apostles were the ones who were promised they would be guided into all truth. On the day of Pentecost, the early church devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings because they were the spokesmen for Christ. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day. He prolonged his speech until midnight. We gathered together to break bread, that is, to observe the Lord's Supper. That tells us that the Lord's Supper was one of the, if not the major part of their worship on the Lord's Day. They gathered together for that purpose. Therefore, it should not be taken lightly. Our thoughts should be focused on the death of Christ. That should be the center and focus of our thinking as we participate. 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 2. 1 Corinthians, the 16th chapter, in verse 2. Get to the right book and chapter. When the apostles spoke, it was like the Lord speaking himself, because they were the ones who were told they would be guided into all the truth, the full truth of Christ's will. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store up as he may prosper, so that there may be no collections when I come. So on the one hand, Paul designated the Lord's Day for the Lord's Supper, and he designated the Lord's Day, the first day of the week, for taking a contribution. So when Paul set that precedent, that example, it becomes binding. And that's why the Lord's Day doesn't fit into the category of being considered, that can be esteemed above other days for the simple reason that it's God's will. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. So whether they were strong or weak, it should be a matter of conviction. And if the weak have the conviction that eating meat sacrificed to idols is a violation of God's will, then they should respect their conscience. We saw that in Romans 14 and verse 23. Whatever is not of faith is sin. Whatever you can't do in all good conscience. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day, observe it to the Lord, in honor of the Lord. The one who eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. For none of us lives to himself, none of us dies to himself. Whether they eat or don't eat, in their thinking, they're doing it to honor the Lord. The strong honor of the Lord, they have the correct understanding. In eating, the weak, on the other hand, are seeking to honor the Lord because they feel like that's the Lord's will for them. So both of them have the same objective, to bring honor to the Lord. They just have a difference of opinion as to what constitutes honoring the Lord, since they give thanks to God. This apparently supports the practice in other places in the New Testament of offering thanks before meals. It's interesting, if you look at Jesus, he never ate without first expressing gratitude to God. And we can do that even if we're out in a restaurant. We can bow our heads and silently pray, or just a few of us can pray together. Let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 4. 1 Timothy chapter 4. I'm going to look at verses 3 through 5. Get to the right place. Where Paul will say, he just talked about the Spirit expressly says in later times some will depart from the faith and so forth. But then in verse 3, he talks about those who forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods that God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. Those foods received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For everything created by God is good. Nothing is to be rejected if it's received with thanksgiving, for it is made holy by the Word of God. And Jesus in Mark 7 and verse 19 declared all foods to be clean. So he says, well, there's a good bit more in verse 6 that we'll try to focus on next week. If the Lord permits, we will begin looking at verse 6 in our study next Sunday.